Welcome to Sleepy Love Tales, soothing romance for a restful night. If these stories help you unwind, be sure to subscribe. For now, close your eyes and let's begin tonight's story. Silver Screen Sins. The audition room smelled of old ambition, cigarette smoke and someone else's hairspray baked into the carpet. Vivienne Laurent sat with her hands folded in her lap and did not look at the door. She had read the script 3 times. The second time she'd crossed out a line in the final scene. The third time she'd written something better in the margin. When Elliot Dane walked in, she did not stand. He noticed. Of course he noticed. She watched him register it. The slight hesitation in his gait. The almost imperceptible recalibration behind his eyes. He was 52 years old, his hair carrying the quiet marks of time, and he moved through rooms the way tides move through harbours, without permission, without apology, reshaping everything. He took the chair across from her, not the director's chair at the table. A choice. He liked to establish intimacy before dominance. She'd read about that too, in the way you read about dangerous coastlines before you sail them. Miss Laurent. His voice was what she'd expected. Low, unhurried, the kind of voice that made you feel you were the only conversation happening in the world. Mr. Dane, she smiled. Not the audition smile, the other one. Whenever you're ready. She looked down at the page, then up at him. There's a line I'd like to change. A pause that lasted precisely long enough to be interesting. Is that so? Line 43. Catherine says I never meant to love him. I think she means the opposite. She does mean the opposite, that's the point. No, Vivienne set the script down. If she means the opposite, the line should say I always meant to love him. What you have is a woman apologising for her own feelings. What you want is a woman confessing to them. Different creature entirely. The silence this time was longer. Elliot Dane leaned back in his chair and looked at her. Not with the practised gaze he used on actresses he'd decided to cast, that warm searchlight designed to make you feel discovered. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he cannot immediately categorise. Read the scene, he said. Your version. She did. When she finished, the casting director at the far end of the table was very still. Elliot had not moved. The afternoon light through the Venetian blinds laid thin gold bars across the floor between them. You can go, he said. She picked up her bag. At the door she paused. Not for effect, or not entirely. The line reads better. You know it does. She left without waiting for his answer. She got the part, of course. She had known she would. What she had not known was that he would call her 3 days later, not through his assistant, but himself. His voice on the line at 9 in the morning while she was eating toast over her kitchen sink. I changed the line, he said, without preamble. She set down her toast. Good. I want to discuss the character. Dinner Thursday. I have a previous engagement Thursday. Another pause. She was beginning to understand his pauses. They were not discomfort. They were recalibration. A man unaccustomed to the terrain adjusting his footing. Friday then. Friday works. She hung up first. His house in Bel Air was everything she'd expected and nothing she'd been prepared for. It sat above the city like a man surveying his holdings. All glass and pale stone, the lights of Los Angeles spread below like a rumour of civilization. She arrived in her own car. She wore a dress she'd owned for 3 years, dark green, nothing borrowed from the studio. He answered the door himself. He was in shirt sleeves, collar open, a glass of something amber already in his hand. He looked at her dress for exactly 1 second. You found it. I have a reliable internal compass, she said, in most directions. They ate on the terrace because the night was warm and because the city below made a useful third presence. Something to look at when looking at each other became too much. He'd cooked, which surprised her. Simple things. Roasted chicken, good bread, a Bordeaux from a bottle with no label. Where did you train? He asked. Paris, then London, a small company in Lyon for 2 years. Theatre. theatre, she confirmed. But why film? She considered him. Why not? Most stage actors I know treat film as a concession, something they do when they need money. Most stage actors I know haven't looked carefully enough at what film can do with a face. She lifted her glass. The camera doesn't care about projection, it cares about truth. That's a different skill entirely, and more interesting. He was watching her with the look again, the cataloguing one, the one that was almost scientific. What? She said. Nothing. He looked back at his wine. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone more eager to please. She laughed, genuinely the laugh she didn't perform. Oh, I'm eager to please, Mr. Dane. I'm simply selective about who I bother pleasing. Later, after the plates were cleared and the second bottle was open, and the city had settled into its nighttime hum below them, he said, Tell me about your mother. She looked at him sidelong. That's an unusual dinner question. I ask unusual questions. She was quiet for a moment. Somewhere in the canyon a coyote called and was answered, and then silence again. She was an actress, Vivienne said. She was almost very good. I think she had the thing, the real thing. But she gave it up when she was 24 for a man who told her she was better than her ambitions. She paused. He was wrong, and eventually she knew he was wrong. But by then she had children and a smaller life, and she kept the headshots in the bottom drawer of her vanity, and sometimes I'd find her looking at them. The terrace was very quiet. She ever regret it? Elliot asked. She never said so, but I watched her watching films in a way that wasn't enjoyment. It was something more like grief. Elliot said nothing. She glanced at him and found his expression unguarded, which startled her. She hadn't expected him to offer her that, the undefended face. My first job, he said after a while, was carrying coffee for a man named Werner Holt. You won't know the name. He made B pictures in the 50s, all of them terrible. He told me once, in front of a room full of people, that I had good taste for someone so thoroughly without talent. What did you say? Nothing. I smiled. I brought him coffee the next morning. He looked at his glass. It took me 15 years to understand that silence in that moment cost me something. What did it cost you? He looked at her. The early belief that I deserved to be in the room. She held his gaze. The city murmured below them. You're in the room now, she said. Yes. Something crossed his expression. Complex, difficult to name. Though I'm beginning to think you might have always been. She drove home in her own car and did not let herself replay the evening until she was inside her apartment with the door locked, and even then she was careful about what conclusions she drew. Production began in October. The story they were making, Ashes in September, was a period drama about a woman who loves a senator who cannot love her back without destroying his career. It was the kind of film that won things. Elliot had made 4 like it. But something was different this time. Everyone on set felt it without quite being able to name it. Vivienne was different. She had a quality the camera found, or possibly created, a kind of density, as if she were more present than the people around her. In rehearsals, she asked questions that made the other actors better. On set, she was exact and unsentimental, and occasionally, in the right light, devastating. In the lunch breaks, she read, not the script, novels, journals, a battered copy of Simone de Beauvoir she carried in her bag. On the 3rd week of production, they shot the scene where Catherine realises, not yet consciously, but in her body, that she is in love. It required no dialogue, only Vivienne at a window, watching a man cross a courtyard below, and the specific quality of stillness that follows a revelation you don't yet have words for. Elliot called cut after the first take. He walked onto the set. The crew watched, the particular attentive silence of people pretending not to watch. He stood beside her at the window, not looking at her, looking at the empty courtyard set. Again, he said quietly, but this time, you know, don't you? You know already. You're choosing not to know. She turned her head and looked at him, something in her expression he didn't design and didn't expect. "I understand the distinction," she said. "They shot it again." When the footage came back, the editor, a small, fierce woman named Dorothea, who had worked with Elliot for 12 years, called him and said simply, "Come and look at this." He went and looked. The playback was silent except for the projector's white noise. Vivienne at the window, the light falling across her in 3 bars, the stillness, the moment, almost invisible, barely there, when something moved behind her eyes. Dorothea said nothing. Neither did he. He drove home that night along Mulholland with the window down and Joni Mitchell very low on the radio, the canyon air cold and smelling of sage, and he tried to remember the last time he had watched someone do something on screen and known he couldn't improve it. He couldn't remember. The affair did not begin with drama. That surprised her later. How ordinary the beginning was. A Tuesday evening. She was in the editing suite watching dailies, and he came in late and didn't turn on the light. Just took the chair beside her in the dark, and they watched 2 hours of footage together without speaking. And when it ended, she stood to go, and he caught her hand. Not urgently, not with the performed certainty of a man who always got what he wanted. He held her hand the way you hold something you're not sure you're allowed to keep. "Vivienne!" She looked at him in the dark. The screen was white and empty. "I know," she said. She left. She went home. She lay awake until 3 in the morning thinking about the specific quality of a man's face when it shows you something it doesn't know how to hide. She went back the next evening. It was not a decision she made strategically, or rather, she told herself it was, and then the telling became unconvincing and she let it go. His bedroom had one window that faced east, and in the mornings the light came in the colour of weak tea and pooled on the floor. She learned this because she stayed once, twice, and then, against her initial design, a 3rd time, and this was when she understood that her plan and her reality were moving in divergent directions. She had planned to remain separate, to let proximity serve her career without surrendering her autonomy, to be strategic and clear-eyed, and to exit cleanly when the time came. She had not planned for the way he listened, not the performance of listening. She knew that trick, had watched it deployed on studio executives and journalists and women at dinner parties. This was different. When she talked about her ideas for Catherine, about the political subtext she saw beneath the love story, about what it meant to want power, and also to want to be wanted, he listened the way you listen to music you aren't sure you understand yet but know is important. He told her things. The fear, private, almost shameful, that he was becoming obsolete. The new directors, the Coppolas and Cassavetes, who moved in a different register, more raw, less controlled, and the terror he felt watching them that was almost indistinguishable from admiration. His mother, who had worshipped film stars the way other women worship saints, who had pointed at the television and whispered that is love at a woman in a glamorous close-up, and what that had cost him to grow up believing. "You learned romance from performance," Vivienne said. They were lying in the half-dark, the city doing its quiet thing below. "I suppose I did." "That's very honest." "You're easy to be honest with." He looked at the ceiling. "I haven't entirely figured out why." She knew why, or part of why. She didn't comfort him, and she didn't complete him, and she didn't arrange herself to fit the shape he was used to. She was a different shape entirely. She suspected this frustrated him as much as it compelled him, and she thought that was probably healthy. What she was less certain about was this, the question that surfaced sometimes, unwanted, in quiet moments. Would you be this version of yourself without him? She looked at her hands on her own chest in the early morning light. She thought about Catherine at the window, the performance that had come from where? From Elliot's direction, from her own understanding of women who choose not to know things they already know, from her mother's headshots in the bottom drawer. All of it, she thought, all of it at once. She got up before he woke and drove home through streets that were still empty, and the question sat in the passenger seat with her, familiar and unsettling. Helena Marquez found her at the Chateau Marmont on a Thursday night in November. The bar loud with the usual industry congregation of men in open collars and women in Holston dresses who were performing accessibility and privately calculating leverage. Helena was 46 and had once been on the cover of Life magazine in a white dress that people still referenced at parties. She was drinking Negronis with the focused efficiency of a woman who had arrived at drinking the way other people arrive at meditation. She sat down next to Vivienne without asking. "I know who you are," she said. "You're Elliot's new one." Vivienne looked at her steadily. "I'm Elliot's actress." "Of course you are," Helena smiled, not unkindly. "He tells you that you're different, doesn't he? And you believe you are. And in some ways you're right. I can see it. You've got something the others didn't have." "Which is?" "The sense that you could leave." She swirled her drink. "The question is whether you will." Vivienne was quiet. "He built me," Helena said, "beautifully. I was extraordinary in 3 of his films, and then I didn't need him anymore, or I thought I didn't, and he started breathing differently, pulling the air out slowly." She looked at the bar. "He doesn't even know he does it. That's the cruelest part. He's not a bad man, he simply cannot bear to be peripheral." "What are you telling me?" Helena set down her glass. "I'm telling you that he builds you beautifully. Just don't let him design your exits." She looked at her. "And don't let him take credit for things you already were." She stood, retrieved her drink and walked back into the noise. Vivienne sat very still for a moment. Then she ordered herself a drink and looked at nothing, and thought about the difference between what she'd been told and what she already knew. The screening room was dark and small, and smelled of old upholstery and heated machinery. Elliot had called her in to watch the cut of her central scene, the long scene in the 3rd act where Catherine finally says out loud what she spent 90 minutes not saying. Vivienne sat in the 2nd row and watched herself. It was, she recognised this dispassionately, extraordinary. She knew extraordinary from ordinary, not out of vanity but craft. The scene was luminous, and it was devastatingly controlled, and it was completely, irreducibly hers. When the lights came up, Elliot was quiet for a moment. "I think we trim it," he said. She turned to look at him. "The middle section." He gestured at the screen. "It's indulgent. It lingers." She looked at him for a long moment. Something clarified. "Is it indulgent?" she said quietly. "Or is it not yours?" The silence was total. She watched the question reach him, watched the thing that crossed his face, which was not anger, but something more exposed than anger. "That's an unfair question," he said. "I don't think it is." She was not unkind, but she was clear. "You can't improve that scene, Elliot, and I think that's very difficult for you." He said nothing. "I'm not trying to wound you," she said. "I'm trying to tell you that you taught me something and I learned it, and now I know it, and that's how it's supposed to work." She paused. "You can't call that back." He stood and walked to the back of the room. She didn't turn to watch him. She looked at the empty screen, white and patient. Finally, from behind her, "The scene stays!" She nodded. She gathered her bag. "Vivienne." She stopped. "Was I wrong?" he said, and the question was not about the film. About how do you think I've been? "I think," she said carefully, "that you love what you can shape. And I think that's been true of everyone you've loved." She turned halfway. "And I think it's lonely, even when it works." She left him there in the dark and she thought, now it begins. The premiere was December, and Los Angeles was doing its best impression of winter. The temperature a merciless 61 degrees, the women in fur stoles anyway, the men in tuxedos that held the heat of long careers. She arrived in her own car. She wore a dress of her own choosing, black and very clean. Her hair was done by someone she'd been using since theatre in London. She did not arrive with Elliot. Not because they'd ended. She hadn't ended it. Hadn't even framed it that way in her own mind. but she had something to do tonight that she needed to do as herself, singular and entire, and she understood that arriving beside him would blur the line between her gravity and his. She walked the carpet. The flashbulbs hit her. The crowd, positioned and press-managed and noisy with performance, called her name. She felt it, the shock of her own name in 100 mouths. Not Elliot Dane's discovery, not the new one, not his. Vivienne Laurent. She stopped and turned toward the crowd and smiled. The real smile, the one she didn't perform, and the cameras registered something true. Inside the theatre, across the lobby, she saw Elliot. He was standing with the studio heads, a glass in his hand, very still in the organised chaos of the premiere. He looked at her across the crowd. He did not smile immediately. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he recognises but cannot place. The specific expression of encountering the proof of something you suspected but didn't want to verify. Then he smiled, and it was not the practised warmth. It was something she'd only seen a handful of times, the unguarded version when the architecture dropped. She held his gaze a moment, then she turned to speak to the journalist who'd materialised at her elbow. The party afterward was at a house in Los Feliz, lanterns in the garden and too much champagne, and the kind of celebratory noise that is indistinguishable from anxiety. At some point in the evening, when the crowd had thinned to the people who genuinely had nowhere else to be, Elliot found her on a stone bench at the edge of the garden, away from the light. He sat beside her without ceremony. "Critics are calling you the future of cinema," he said. "I know." It was quiet. Below them, Los Angeles performed its usual indifference to human significance. Vivienne, she waited. "I don't want to guide you anymore." He said it with the specific difficulty of a man saying something he's been rehearsing and has still not gotten comfortable with. He stopped. "I am trying to say something I haven't said before and I'm not good at it." "I know that too. I love you." The words came out plainly, stripped of strategy. Not the actress, not what I've been doing. You. He looked at the city. I realised that may be insufficient given... "It's not insufficient," she said. He looked at her. "But it comes with terms," she said, "and they're not negotiable." "Tell me." "I stay as myself, not your discovery, not your protégé, not your legacy." She looked at him directly. "If you need me to need you, this will not survive. I can love you without needing you, and that will have to be enough, or it won't be enough, and we'll know which." He was quiet for a long time. She let the silence be what it was. "I'm afraid," he said finally, "that if you don't need me, I'll become... peripheral." "Yes." "Then you'll have to decide," she said, "whether you can love someone who doesn't orbit you." She paused. "I think you might be able to. I didn't think so in October. I think so now." "What changed?" "You made a phone call," she said, "for the Swiss film. You could have hesitated. I think you almost did, and then you didn't." He thought she didn't know about that. The Swiss director who'd called looking for a leading actress. The 2 seconds in which Elliot had held the receiver and thought, clearly and without pretense, "If she does this film, she will not need this one from me." Then he'd recommended her, fully, without qualification. "You knew," he said. "Marcus told me. He didn't realise it was a confidence." He looked at her with an expression she had come to value most among all his expressions. Not the warmth, not the authority, but this, the undisguised one, raw and uncertain and entirely his. "I didn't want to," he said. "I know. But you... He stopped. "You were always going to be this, weren't you? I don't know anymore if I..." "You gave me a window," she said. "You gave me resources and a camera, and you asked me questions no one else had thought to ask, and you listened when I answered. That's not nothing." She touched his hand briefly. "But the woman in that scene was already here. I was always going to get here. I just got here. This way." The garden was quiet except for the city's distant hum. "Can you live with that?" she asked. He turned his hand over and held hers, the same way as the editing suite, tentative, asking. "I'm learning too," he said. There is an editing suite on the 3rd floor of the studio building, and it has been there since 1961, and it smells of old cigarettes and warm circuitry, and the peculiar density of rooms where important decisions have been made. In February, on a Tuesday, Vivienne stands behind Elliot as he watches footage from the Swiss film. She's not in it. She had to pass in the end for scheduling. But she watches the frame with him, and she sees what he sees, which is a young actress doing something interesting with her hands. He watches without speaking. When the reel ends, he does not immediately offer notes. He's quiet for a moment in the way that is different from all his other silences. Not calculation, not recalibration. "She's extraordinary," he says. "No possessive. No, I spotted her or I'll need to work with her. Just the fact of it, offered plainly to the room." Vivienne rests her hand on his shoulder. He reaches up and covers it with his. The projector hums. The empty screen holds its white light. Below them, through the closed window, Los Angeles does what Los Angeles does. Vast and indifferent and perpetually dreaming, generating stars from ordinary dark. Neither of them speaks. They don't need to. There is a particular kind of love that does not announce itself. It does not arrive with grand gesture or clean epiphany. It is slower and stranger than that. It is the daily negotiation between what you need and what you're willing to become. Between the person you fought to be and the person who makes the fighting feel worth it. It is two people in a dark room, watching light on a screen, not performing anything. It is a suff. It is actually more than enough. It is the thing they had been moving toward all along without knowing what it was called.